Now, talking about what is going on in France right now, if you haven't heard, crap is hitting the fan. Essentially, last week there was a shooting in France between a 17-year-old boy and a police officer, and that 17-year-old boy was killed. Unfortunately, and I think part of the reason might be on the French government and what's going on with investigations, but for whatever reason, we don't have a ton of details about this at the moment. More details will probably follow, but I thought it was prudent to talk about it today because it's been over a week. And it's not really being talked about as much in the United States media, even though it has a huge effect on what's going on here and on the world stage. This is essentially the George Floyd of France. If you didn't know, George Floyd was the guy who was killed and kind of started the Black Lives Matter movement. He didn't start it, but people started it after he was killed or overdose, depending on the story you believe in. I personally believe he died because of fentanyl overdose, but regardless, he died, and it started the Black Lives Matter. According to NPR, his name was Nahel. NPR reports saying Nahel was driving a yellow Mercedes when he was shot at close range during a police stop near Nelson Mandela Square around 8 a.m. Tuesday, according to their mayor. Footage from several vantage points shows that despite early claims that two police officers were in grave danger when one of them opened fire, the pair were standing next to the driver window. So, pause really quick. Nahel was pulled over by some cops. NPR later says, with an officer pointing a gun inside before the car began to move past them. Quote, "You are going to get a bullet in the head," a voice is heard saying, according to France 24 news outlet. As the car moves forward, a single shot is heard. Nahel died at the scene. His car rolled forward, coming to a stop after hitting a utility pole. Two other people, again, this is still according to NPR, two other people were in the car with Nahel. One has spoken to the police, but the other fled the scene and was being sought by law enforcement as of this article, which was posted on July 1st. I want to talk really quick about the title sponsor of this podcast, gulagamerica.com. Here's the deal, guys. I'm very passionate about the United States not becoming like France. I don't want them to be like France. I don't want them to be like Europe. They have so many problems. Gulags, that's a big problem. That's why I partnered with Gulag America. Gulag America can hook you up with high quality apparel and clothing. Founded by an Army and Reserve veteran, Gulag America has t-shirts, long sleeves, and hoodies that are great for both men and women. Here's a question for you regarding France and Russia. Do you even know what a gulag is? I recently had a conversation with some family. None of them knew what it is. Often the term gulag refers to literal slave encampments in Russia. But as I've talked about on this podcast, there are gulags that are not necessarily physical, but the media, the military industrial complex, that are gulags and that are imprisoning us here in America. I'm talking about these every day so that we can fight them. So is Gulag America. For a limited time, if you use my code JoshCar10, you will get 10% off at gulagamerica.com. Again, that's JoshCar10 for 10% off at gulagamerica.com. It is the warning, not the wish, so that we can fight them and keep America free. Again, link in the description down below, gulagamerica.com. So again, this story is broken for quite a while. It's almost been out for 2 weeks, but it just hasn't been talked about a lot in the mainstream media. So I wanted to talk about it today and really what it means. I'm not gonna make a claim in this podcast, in this show today, whether or not the police did the right thing or the wrong thing. It seems to me that there are not enough details out there about this particular case. What's clear is that the police shot Nahel. And it seems that it was unprovoked as of now. We don't know if it was racially charged. We don't really know the motivation behind it. Again, I don't know why. Like, it doesn't take very long for the United States to come out with these sort of things. And so I'm not quite sure why they haven't, why France hasn't come out with more information. A little bit of context, though. This is why I want to explain why people are up in arms about this. Not that this isn't a horrible event on its own, but things like this happen in the world. Police officers can do bad things, or 17-year-old boys can do bad things, depending on whose fault this was. But the reason why this is particularly touchy subject and touchy field is that this was a Muslim, and there's been a lot of contention in France right now over immigration policy. If you didn't know, France has more Muslims in it than any European country. Just to break down those numbers for you a little bit, 5.7 million Muslims are in France. In the United States, there are only 3.5 million Muslims, and the United States' population is far greater than France's. So just putting that into context, they're a huge minority in France. I mean, I think they're comparable to like Hispanics here in the United States. Probably the biggest minority in France. When there's big minorities, obviously there can be racial contention or religious contention in this case. The thing that kind of is annoying is that people are jumping to conclusion, and like when something bad happens and you're not sure about the facts, usually what you do is you wait for the facts, or maybe you say something rash on social media, or you do something rash verbally. But no, the people in France, mostly young people, these were teenagers his age, as well as young adults, decided instead that they were going to go out and burn and loot and destroy that city, which is really interesting, especially considering they don't really know the whole story. So the reason why I say this is a lot like Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, is because he died and immediately chaos ensued. They literally have the military in Paris trying to quash this almost like rebellion. We see that they are doing similar things to what happened in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed. School buses, schools, as well as government buildings are being targeted, which is like really crazy. Like, why? Like, okay, you want to bring justice to a 17-year-old boy who, in your opinion, was unjustly killed. Why is the solution to go to the buses where a mom and her kids or the old lady is riding the bus and throwing a brick through it and it hits them? Like, how is that justice to the 17-year-old? Going to government buildings that might have nothing to do with the police officer that did that? How, like, just on a logical level, how does that fulfill your purpose? And so these people are not seeking justice. They're vigilantes, and they're not vigilantes that are even seeking a just outcome. They literally just want chaos in France. And it's gotten to the point where, like I said, the military and the National Guard in France has gotten involved, and it's like a full-out war zone in Paris right now. One side note about this that I find very ironic is that the left, the people who are always affected by these things, bringing it back to the United States level during Black Lives Matter, the people who are always affected are the people that the left claim to protect. So who is that? It's inner city minorities, people who are less fortunate, people who might need social welfare. The ironic thing about this is when these protests happen over racial conflict, it's always done by the left, and it always hurts the minorities that they purport to help. So an example, in Minneapolis, do you think it was the rich billionaire, like the white rich billionaire that they were looting? No, it was the black store owner in downtown Minneapolis. Do you think that it was the elitist police officer chief that they went and threw a brick through his car window? No, it was the random dad who also was black, just commuting from work. And so it actually makes zero sense. They're literally fighting themselves, and it's really contradictory to their purpose as well as what they stand for. And I think we're seeing every time that this happens, there's a resurgence on the right, where a lot of these people who are affected poorly by these vigilante groups go more conservative, because they're like, if people aren't going to protect our cities, then we got to leave. Like, they're not going to stay in Minneapolis if their store is getting looted. They're going to go to a conservative city and vote Republican if it means that their small business can be saved. And this really is virtue signaling on the biggest scale. Virtue signaling is essentially when you're showing everyone around you, look how great I am, look what I believe, look at all these, great things. It's when you put the little black flag on your Instagram so people know that you're not racist. It doesn't actually mean anything. You didn't actually help anyone. You didn't give charity. Instead, you just put a little black flag to show everyone that you had virtue. That's what virtue signaling is. But this is virtue signaling on steroids. It's actually doing, like, I actually, in a way, I almost give them credit. At least they did something about it. But the thing that they did was absolutely despicable. Instead of just putting the black flag or a rainbow flag on their Instagram, they went out and threw a brick through a school window. They could have hit a random high school kid or a teacher that supports those high school kids and had nothing to do with a 17-year-old boy being shot. And the only reason why they did it was to show everyone around them that they support Nahel, which I get it. Like, I'm happy that you support someone who is unjustly murdered, but throwing a brick through a window, lighting a fire on a school bus is not the way to do it, and it's really counterproductive to their movement. Here's what bugs me though: people can be dumb. Mob mentality and mob rage is really dangerous. It's really common. The UN said pretty much the dumbest thing that you could imagine this week about it. The UN comes out and says a lot of things about these kind of when riots or protests get really big. It makes sense in this instance that the UN would come out with a statement, but they literally said the dumbest thing imaginable, and it kills me. I'm going to read it for everyone. This is what they said. Quote, they said, "This is a moment for the country, France, to seriously address the deep issues of racism and racial discrimination in law enforcement." In other words, they're saying, hey, all these people who are destroying Paris, this is a really good opportunity. It's a great moment for you guys to listen to them, these crazy people. You really ought to listen to them. There's some seriously, it's like, hold up. Let me get this straight. You're saying one bad police officer, and we don't even know we're just assuming at this point that the police officer had bad intentions. We don't even know that much about the incident, but let's assume that it was bad, okay? You're talking about one police officer that did one really bad act, and then you're talking about hundreds and thousands of people who have done horrible acts to totally innocent people, and you're saying we should listen to that. How does that make any sense? That is just as bad as if you said, hey, we really ought to listen to that police officer. You might have had something there with killing that 17-year-old boy. That's the exact thing that they're saying. They're saying we need to justify and listen to people who are doing evil things in society. The dumbest thing that the UN could have said, because all that does is it incentivizes these gross vigilante groups like BLM and what's going on in France to continue to ransack innocent people in the inner cities. For all of the talk of liberals being charitable and nice and helping the little guy, this sure does not help them at all. This is like the worst thing that you could do. If you've got an immigrant who comes to France, is a Muslim immigrant, like think about all the Muslims that are affected by this. I can just think of, there's a guy, he comes from Sudan. He's Muslim. He's in France. He's happy to be there because it's a little more democratic. I say that tongue in cheek because France is near a dictatorship at this point. But they're a little more democratic than Sudan. They go there and he decides to start a small business because immigrants tend to be very entrepreneurial. He's in an inner city. He hears about someone in his community that gets murdered, obviously very sad about this. And then randomly, the kids from his community come and throw a brick through a store, and the next door to him is on fire, and he's terrified that his store is going to catch on fire. How did those people help that Muslim at all? It makes zero sense. It's very upsetting. And I really hope that the media and others will step up and talk about how unjust it is for people to have this outrage of violence whenever one bad thing happens. Also, if you talk about violence that's happening in France, again, I'm not saying that I want that 17-year-old boy to die, but the fact that one police officer killed one boy and then we have thousands of people ransacking the streets, that is a way bigger sin than one police officer. And the fact that they could justify it through one heinous act is pretty despicable. I just don't believe, I guess my central thesis with this, I just don't believe that we should take violent people seriously. I think it's important to understand like why they're doing it. It's okay to study them and understand it. It's not a call to action. We don't negotiate with terrorists, right? That's kind of the classic phrase. They are, by all metrics, terrorists. They are trying to instill terror in society so that they will somehow get some nebulous rights that they haven't even proclaimed on their own. I don't believe that we should negotiate with terrorists. I mean, just an example of this is very clear in society. If you have a toddler and he's acting out and he just has a crazy temper tantrum, you don't go up to him and ask him, hey buddy, you're freaking out. Like, tell me about it. Like, how can I? It's like, no, he spilled his milk and he's freaking out. You don't listen to him. You calm him down. You clean up the spilled milk. You don't let him parent you all of a sudden. It's the same thing in this situation. The media need to talk about this more. That's why I'm talking about it. Now you know about it if you didn't know about it.